beaming from Pacific Junction Hotel to Earth.
Yo, Benjamin.
How you doing?
I'm good.
Good to talk to you.
Yeah, it's been a little while. It's been a couple of years, actually.
Yeah, BouncerCon.
Mm-hmm. Are your I'm just adjusting the levels before we get going, but are your kids getting the hang of the whoopee cushion?
Yeah, those little bastards. They're always trying to sneak it under my office chair as well.
Oh, that's a classic. It's good to see that the kids are keeping the classics alive.
Yeah, I've got some Halloween pranks going as well. You know, spiders put on my pillow and whatnot.
Oh.
I get no respect. No respect.
Yeah, no, I could see that. Yeah, you and Rodney Dangerfield, I could see how you would end up in the same category. You guys have a lot in common. All right, so we'll get started. Good evening and welcome to my Summer Lair. I'm your horror host, Sammy Younan. I'm terrified to welcome back writer Benjamin Percy. When we last spoke, his novel, The Dark Net, was out, and he was writing Green Arrow for DC Comics and a Wolverine podcast for Stitcher. Like the hand out of the grave, he's returned with a new book, Suicide Woods. And if you are a fan of pouches, you'll be happy to hear he's been tapped to write X-Force for Marvel Comics. So, welcome back, Benjamin.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We are approaching Halloween as we talk. And is Halloween, I guess, your favorite holiday this time of year?
October is the holy month. This is absolutely my favorite time of year.
What's the attraction to it? Why Halloween and the fall and the horror and all that?
Well, on the one hand, I love it when the air starts to get a bite to it, because my heart melts over 70 degrees. So, fall and winter are my favorite seasons. And there's something about the way that the leaves, the way they burn with color, and it just makes you pause again and notice the world around you once more. It's almost like my senses come alive at this time of year. But then there's also, the horror of it all and the spookiness of the season. And I tend to binge on horror novels and horror movies and horror TV shows around mid-September through Halloween. So it suits my my hardwiring. The shadow soap time of year.
Do you, for the horror movies and books and TV shows that you're binging, are you going back and like reading old school stuff, like Edgar Allan Poe or things like that, Stephen King, or are you like
Absolutely
newer stuff?
Yeah, right now I've got on my bedside table the best stories of Richard Matheson, and
he's so good.
I've read them many times before, and I'm reading them again. And he is the author that Stephen King says had the greatest influence on him, and it's obvious why. I mean, he's as pulpy as he is smart. He is as funny as he is terrifying. And some of those stories, like Duel, have been made into fantastic films, and other stories like Nightmare at 20,000 Feet have been made into my favorite Twilight Zone episode of all time. And I delight in them. And I also have the Sandman Omnibus at my bedside right now, along with a bunch of Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror comics from my collection. So I'm doing a deep dive down nostalgia lane in a way, rereading all these stories that delighted me long ago.
Yeah, this is a bit of a tangent, but Twilight Zone is celebrating 60 years this year.
That's right. And Jordan Peele, right, is part of that celebration with his reboot.
We'll jump. That was the past. Now we'll jump to the present. And your new book is Suicide Woods. What can you tell us about Suicide Woods? And if both of us go there together, will both of us come back, or just one of us come back?
So, Suicide Woods is the title story of the collection. And that story in particular was inspired by an article I read in the New Yorker a few years back about the suicide culture of Japan and the suicide forest that exists in the shadow of Mount Fuji. And there are a lot of bodies stacked up there. People go there to die. He'll find skeletons in the moss. You'll find bodies dangling from trees like ornaments, and this, haunted me, stuck in my brain. And I decided to explore it through the prism of fiction, and I took this landscape, this sort of, I guess you could call it a terrible place, which is a trope in horror stories.
Mm-hmm.
The terrible place is Hill House. The terrible place is the Myers house. Terrible place is
Overlook.
Yeah, and the Overlook, and so I took the terrible place and I transplanted it into our country, and I also explored, in a way, these anxious and depressive times that we live in. So, yeah, it's about suicide ideation, and it's about a group of people who are in a support situation, I guess you could say. It's a kind of therapy circle.
Mm-hmm.
And the head of this therapy circle is, in essence, trying through exposure to deaden their want for suicide, to sort of alleviate their will to kill themselves and offer them a more promising future. And things go horribly wrong.
So there's a number of short stories in the book, and you mentioned the anxious times. Is part of that a response, just putting out short stories, a response to kind of like our shrinking attention span? We hear all these articles all the time about that.
Yeah, you would hope that in this, with our short attention spans, that people would be more drawn to short stories. I'm not sure that that's the case. I think they're drawn like moths to the glow of their screens instead. But I love the short form. And it's my first love as a writer. My first 2 books were short stories. And I write, 2 or 3 or 4 of them a year now. And I had enough for 2 collections. But there was a big steaming pile of short fiction that my editor and I worked through, with the understanding that we needed to make a book. We needed to make this feel not just like a random assortment of narratives between 2 covers, but instead we needed to find stories that spoke to one another, that were united by theme. And so all of the pieces in this collection are, about loneliness, about the clash of civilization and wilderness, and they are sort of trying to live up to the maxim of my book of essays. I wrote a book of craft essays that's sort of like an arsenal of techniques, specifically techniques that contribute to suspense and momentum. And that book is called Thrill Me. So in a way, these stories in Suicide Woods are all trying to live up the maxim of that book, which is, writing stories that are both compulsively readable and artfully told.
Yeah, and so the book opens with the very first story, The Cold Boy. How would you kind of describe this one? Because I get the feeling that almost like everybody in the story is dead inside. How would you describe what's happening in this one? This is a really unusual image.
And that story is inspired by 2 different things. One, oftentimes I'll have an image in my head, and sometimes this image will be there for years, and sometimes the image just comes out of the ether, like I just invented, or sometimes it's born out of life. And in this case, when I was living in Ames, Iowa, and I was teaching at Iowa State, I saw something rather horrifying one day. I was walking with Rick Bass, he's another writer, across the campus, and around this time, a student had gone missing. He had left the bar drunk, and he was never seen again. And so on this wintry morning, we're walking across campus, and we look down on the campus lake, which is frozen, and there are all these cops on the lake, and they're sawing holes into it, and all these divers are dropping down into the water. And they're looking for this kid because there were dogs baying in the fields, there were search parties in the woods, and they thought maybe he had fallen through the ice. So from this angle, we're on this hillside, and from this angle, with the holes carved into the ice, the pond looked like a skull. And Rick Bass turned to me, and he said, "You going to call it?" And sometimes writers do this. You'll be at a bar, somebody's telling a story, and they'll be like, I'm calling that one. That one's mine.
Yes, like volleyball.
So he said, "You want to call it?" Yeah. He said, "You want to call it?" And I said, "Let's race." And so we actually both wrote stories that were inspired by that moment. The Cold Boy is mine. It was also inspired by all of these crows that winter in Iowa. Iowa is I don't know why, but like thousands and thousands and thousands of crows come to Ames, Iowa in the winter. And it's so bad that the sky is sometimes black with them. And you go across campus, it's this postcard perfect campus, but there are so many crows that roost on the buildings and in the parking garages that they have to put in these sound systems that play over and over again the noise of crows being tortured. And so you'll be walking to this campus and you'll hear shouting from the rooftops. And, one time I was actually listening to these carolers, like these kids in Christmas sweaters. They were caroling on campus. And in between the songs, here they are singing like, ho, 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 who wouldn't know? And they pause and they're singing and you hear in the background, some crow being electrocuted, which is supposed to scare them off. And anyway, so one time actually I walked into this church after a Christmas Eve service and I heard up and down the street this this strange rusty muttering sound. And I looked up and down the block and it was night, but all the trees, they should have been skeletal, they should have been bare, but they all looked leafed out, but they were blackly leafed. It turned out to be all of these crows were in maple after maple after maple after maple up and down the street. And then I heard this behind me as well. I turned around and the entire roof of the church is covered with crows. It's very Hitchcockian. Mm-hmm. And so the crows, they're sort of like an echo point. They're meaningfully repeated throughout the story. This cold boy that I imagined, twisting in the water through these columns of light. He's in the story. And so, I'm oftentimes doing this. Like I've got these images and I arrange them in a dark constellation and I figure out the meaning of them. And yeah, everything in that story is frozen for good reason. And because it's about lifelessness. And he, too, the main character of the story, Ray, he's a taxidermist, right, which is about life made motionless. Mm-hmm. So all of the things come together in sort of an eerie way. And I have another story, too, that connects to this, and it connects to a lot of the stories in the collection. Maybe you've heard this one before, but a father walks into a bedroom to wish his child good night. And the boy is in his bed, pale and shivering, and the father asks him, "What's wrong?" And the boy says, "I think there's something under the bed." And so the father gets down on his knees and he lifts the dust ruffle and he says, "I'm sure that's not the case," but indulges the boy by looking underneath the box spring, and there he sees a face, a pale and shivering face, and it seems to belong to his son, who says, "I think there's something in my bed." The thing that I love about that story is its duplicity, is its moral confusion, because you're not sure, like, is this the predator and is that the victim, or are they both the monster? Mm-hmm. And that's something that I'm tackling, not just in The Cold Boy, but in a lot of these stories.
And it feeds into what you were saying before, how that some of these stories, or all these stories, are a response to the anxious times that we're in. Because that's a classic horror thing where there's something in my closet, this house is haunted, and people try to say it, either a young boy or a bunch of horny teenagers in Crystal Lake, whatever it is, and they're trying to say there's something not right here, this pickle's not kosher. And what ends up happening is everyone always dismisses them, denies them, tells them they're crazy, those kind of things, until they all find out that they were right.
Well, that idea of the character who is unreliable, and maybe it's not just the other characters in the story that don't trust this person, maybe it's the reader as well. Mm-hmm. If you think about some of those stories we were talking about earlier, I mentioned Haunting of Hill House, and you brought up The Shining. Both of those are notable in that they not only have, the Overlook Hotel or Hill House, which are cursed locations. They're stained, they're haunted, but they're explored through an unreliable perspective. In the case of Hill House, it's through the perspective of Eleanor. In the case of the Overlook Hotel, it's explored through Jack Torrance. And both of them are on edge. Both of them are not to be trusted. And so you can't help but wonder, are the horrible things that are happening, are they caused by this structure, this stamp of land, or are they caused by the person? And that's something that, if you look at the novella in Suicide Woods, the novella that caps the collection is called The Uncharted. I'm doing something similar there, where you have a terrible place, and that terrible place is the Bermuda Triangle of the North. It's an actual place in Alaska, and Alaska has the highest number of missing person cases in the country, and a lot of them come from the Bermuda Triangle of the North. So that is my Overlook Hotel. That is my Hill House. And it's being explored by this team, this team that essentially works for Google. I mean, I create a different name for the company, but, it's a map-making company. It's a company that is trying to capture every inch of the world, which is what Google is right now trying to do. And so they go to this forbidden place, and each of them is struggling with their own emotional weakness. They're each struggling with their own, sort of inner turmoil, and the place is a reflection of that.
Yeah, first season of the Wolverine podcast, it was set in Burns, Alaska. Burns, of course, is a fictional place. But I believe it was in the very first episode, one of the characters says there's a lot of ways to die in Alaska.
Yeah, that's the jaws of Alaska. They'll chew you up, and it's my favorite state. Been there several times. I've been fishing there. I've been hiking there, and I can't get enough of those. The jawline of its mountains, the mud flats of some of those inlets, just like the staggering beauty and danger of the place. I'm fascinated by, so I'm going to keep writing about it.
This is your Overlook Hotel, because what you just said, like hiking and fishing in Alaska, that sounds very serene, very nice. What you do to your characters, and even in the Wolverine podcast, you put them in these really hostile, harsh environments. That's also just as scary too, because nature is a real beast. We should be scared of nature in a way.
Yeah, and I grew up in a family that is very outdoorsy, and for a time my parents were back to the landers. They, grew their own vegetables. We had a chicken coop. My father hunted all of our meat, so I grew up eating venison and elk and bear, which is why I sound like this. A steady diet of bear. And every weekend, just about, we were headed off into some dry canyon or headed up some mountainside, and we'd be camping, we'd be fishing, we'd be rock hounding and fossil hunting. And, this taught me not just the wonder of the outdoors, but also the perils of the outdoors. And, I had a lot of near-death experiences. I also had friends who died. One of, the people I went to school with died when skiing. Another one died when snowmobiling. Another one was bitten by a rattlesnake, and on we go. These situations arose that have just imprinted themselves in my brain like a fossil, and I'm finding different ways to explore them on the page now.
When you and I talked about your last novel, The Dark Net, the premise of the book, or what inspired that book, was how vulnerable we are to hackers, cybersecurity. Our records can be erased, all that kind of, we're very vulnerable. We're very exposed, especially online. And it's the same thing with nature, and that's what you're saying with, like, when you say you've had, like, near-death experiences, what were some of the situations where you kind of got into trouble and, like, you may not have been able to get out?
Well, just to list off a few, there was one in which I was dragged out, this is as a kid, by an undercurrent, and I was dragged offshore and unable to swim until somebody came and ripped me out of the water. So that was when I was 6. Later on, I was on a dirt bike, so my friends and I would tear around on dirt bikes, and I ended up going off a cliff on one. I was being a little reckless. I tried to do a backflip on Mount Bachelor while skiing, and I landed on my head and skidded down this cornice. Another time, and this is when things, get really scary and where you can see things that connect to my books. I worked at Glacier National Park one summer, And the first thing that the ranger told me when I got off of the train was that the other gardener, so I was hired as a gardener there, that the other gardener had been eaten, so I was it.
What ate the gardener?
He had been discovered on off a trail, and they found his spine, and they found his boots with his feet still in them.
Wow.
And this bear and her cubs then developed a taste for people. So they stalked my roommate at the lodge for 10 miles. So he was hiking with a group of people, and these bears, they would bluff charge over and over again, this group. And then, you know, I was in the backcountry. I was in my tent sleeping when I heard this crunching, and there was a bear just outside the tent crashing towards me, and it pressed its face against the nylon, and it was inches away from my face, and the slobber of its muzzle began to seep through the nylon in the shape of a melted bat. And I had my knife out, and I was this close to just, you know, slamming it forward into its snout, but managed to maintain my fear and adrenaline, and eventually it just pulled back, and the nylon sprung back into place, and you know, it tramped off into the darkness once more. And you know, I can just keep going where these moments where they, you know, you feel like you've put your foot over the edge of a cliff and drawn it back, and there's when you do that, when you just get a little taste of the Reaper, you know, that's when you feel most alive.
I'm really grateful now that I'm a city kid. The worst thing I've done is just go down the wrong alleyway. So.
Hey, that can be bad too, as Batman can attest.
That's true. But speaking of bear, one of the stories that's really interesting is Heart of a Bear. Your main character is an actual bear.
Yeah, I should have reserved that for the title of my memoir.
Yeah, yes, right? And in the acknowledgments, you write, and a special nod to Mary Shelley, the Queen of Darkness, for Frankenstein, without which I never would have written Heart of a Bear. So why give Mary Shelley a nod for Heart of the Bear?
So Frankenstein is one of my favorite novels, but my favorite part of Frankenstein is chapters 6 through 11. And in them, the creature is stumbling through the winter forest, and he happens upon this cabin, and he hides behind the woodpile. And there he convalesces, and he spies through a gap in the logs of this cabin, the people who live within it. And he learns from them over the course of the winter language and customs and even love. You know, he feels great affection for them. He feels like he is a part of the family, even though he is separate from them. And when spring comes, he decides to introduce himself, and that doesn't go well. You know, they're obviously horrified by the sight of him, the lurching sight of, deformed sight of him, and they scream and scatter away, and he destroys them. So I'm playing around with something similar here with the perspective of a bear.
Yeah, it's very similar to like Wolverine in a sense, where like he's kind of misunderstood.
Yeah, those are my favorite characters.
Mm-hmm.
The monsters that have bruised hearts.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Is that what we can expect from your Wolverine series when it starts?
Well, there's a little bit of that, sure. I mean, there's all sorts of things I'm going to be exploring. Well, I will say, first of all, when it comes to Wolverine, you know, he's never been in a better place. If you've read House of X, if you've read Powers of 10, if you know what's going on.
Hickman did an incredible job.
Yeah, Hickman did an incredible job, and he's built this garden for us to play in, and it's got 1,000 years of storytelling in it. And if you think about this new status quo, the mutants have declared sovereignty, Krakoa is a nation, you know, Wolverine has never been better, and he's even approaching, though he would never use a word like this, happiness. And, you know, he has his family nearby, and I'm not just talking about, you know, Doc and Laura. And I'm not just talking about Professor X, you know, his father figure. I'm also talking about the Summers family, who he lives with now. And I'm also talking about the larger mutant family, you know, mutant kind. They're all there on the island. And even those who have fought against one another in the past are now united against AI and against humankind. So Wolverine's never been in a better place. That's where we begin our story. And the question is, can it last? And I'm guessing you know the answer to that.
That'd be a short series if it lasted. It'd be like 2 panels or something.
It's just Wolverine chilling on Krakoa. That's the whole thing.
Okay, so splash pages basically.
Drinking at the tiki bar, and no, so I'm exploring all sorts of different, angles of the character. I'm interested in his memory, his broken mind. He's somebody who's had his mind wiped, who has had his mind planted over and over again, and as a result of that, there's always this uncertainty as to what is true or not. There are all these gaps in his history. So I'll be exploring that. I'll be exploring, I guess you could say the toll and the responsibility of immortality. Wolverine's been around for a long time, and he's gonna be around for a long time. And when you see the world go through wars, and when you outlive your friends, like, that messes with you, and it changes your view of life, and maybe makes you more protective of those who are vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I'm exploring his relationships with some of his closer friends, and exploring his relationship with some of his tighter enemies. And the first issue is oversized, and I don't know that I'm allowed to say how oversized it is, but it's a big one. And I'll say that it has 2 stories in it, and those 2 stories are completely different tonally. One is more of a crime story, a mystery story, and the other one is more of a horror story with a dash of romance in it. They're tonally so different, and I think that will give people an understanding of like what to expect, which is I'm coming at Wolverine from all different angles.
That makes sense. Wolverine's always, most of the X-Men characters, but Wolverine especially, he's a walking pile of like contradictions. A lot of things he doesn't really kind of make sense. He's like a teacher, but he's also a terrible example. It's not one of the X-Men you would want to emulate.
That's right. And here he is, like, he's got this history of violence, right? Like he's spilled enough blood to fill a reservoir, but he also feels horrible guilt over that, and is oftentimes seeking atonement. So that's another haunted angle of him that I'm going to be mining.
Were you excited now? You've been writing Wolverine kind of for the podcast series for Stitcher. You wrote 2 seasons for that.
Yeah.
But now you're going to be switching and obviously, as you said, playing in Hickman's X-Garden. So is it kind of a different approach then? Because this one is so grounded in all of the concepts and things that Hickman has set up?
Yeah. Those other, the Wolverine podcast series, that was out of continuity. And now this is, as I've said, a total paradigm shift. What's happening with Krakoa. Mm-hmm. So completely different context for telling any sort of X story.
And what can we expect from X-Force? You're like Frankenstein now. You've lumbered in, and now you're part of this mutant council, this X family. You're one of the writers that will be penning the stories for Dawn of X. So what can we expect from X-Force? Pouches?
X-Force is a product of this new dawn. This is not the X-Force you're familiar with. It's not just dark X-Men. It's not just, a team of mutants who are, chasing down Black Ops operations. Like it's vaster than that. It's more complicated than that. Because Krakoa is a nation. This is the mutant CIA. And I'm approaching it as a procedural. So if you think of like Law and Order, there is a division here. There is a group of analysts. There's an intelligence unit, and then on the other hand, there is a wet work team. Essentially their Delta Force. And the idea is that the Quiet Council is aware of the necessity of X-Force, but they don't want to know what's happening. Just sort of like our government sometimes treats the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be surveillance. There's going to be blackmail. There's going to be assassinations, offensive and defensive measures taken that won't necessarily sit well even within X-Force with everyone. This is very morally complicated. They're interested in the greatest good for the greatest number of mutants, but sometimes the way in which that's accomplished is dirty.
That's interesting, because I mean, it's very similar to what you're saying of like how the mafia will have that guy in tracksuits to kind of send them over, and the guy in the tracksuit will have a chat with you. Is basically what you're saying. Where like these are the X-Forcer or the guys in the tracksuit who will have a talk with people who have an issue with mutants.
Yeah, sometimes no talk is necessary. Sometimes you just get out the brass knuckles and the chainsaws and get to work.
That's still communicating, though, right?
It's a different message. Words, Wolverine. Use your words.
There you go. That's the tagline for the book. How are you keeping all of this stuff straight? Like, you got these short stories and you're writing novels. Like, I remember in an interview, or maybe you and I were when we were talking about it, but you mentioned you had a nightmare factory where you kind of had like a little room.
That's right.
Where you put all this stuff together. Can you just describe the nightmare factory for somebody?
Yeah. So I'm in my office right now, and I'm looking into the nightmare factory. There's a closet off of my office, and this closet was used by the previous owner of the home as a dark room. This is where, beneath the red light, he would develop his photographs. So I now use the dark room to tack up all of my ideas. The wall is heavily papered, and I have articles ripped from magazines and newspapers. I have 3x5 note cards with ideas jotted down on them. I have action set pieces detailed. I have blueprints of screenplays and novels. And I go into the dark room every morning and I commune with my imaginary friends. I revisit them. And I'm always staying visually in touch with the stories that I'm writing because I am working on several different things. And by having it up on the wall, by having it visually represented, I can move stuff around and I can also file it away. I don't have to have it all in my head at once.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I keep track of it all. And I also am carefully managing my time. I will work, let's say, for 2 days exclusively on X-Force, and then I will work for 3 days just on my novel, and then I will work maybe one morning on an edit, and then in the afternoon I will work on a screenplay, and so on. I'm always segmenting everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I'm juggling. Writing something and then switching to another document, and writing something else and then switching back to another document. That would make my brain get torn to confetti.
I could imagine, because it's incredible when you look back at Stephen King's output in the 80s, like cranking out Christine, Misery, Tommyknockers. Like, he was cranking them out one at a time, obviously, in terms of publishing, but he was writing them like 3 or 4 or 5 books at a time. And I'm amazed that he was able to kind of keep all the characters, all the plot, all the details, all that stuff together, and still kind of put it out a high volume and quality work. That's impressive.
Yeah, well, it's, if I was an X-Men, I would be the lamest X-Men because my power is deep concentration. So I'd be like, look out, Sabretooth is coming. And I'd like to sit there and concentrate. I'd be totally worthless. But that's what I can do. I can get at my keyboard and I can just go someplace else. And I can go, into this dream world for hours at a time and essentially be unaware of my surroundings unless my dog comes over and, paws at me. So I might have 10 pages in front of me that I barely remember writing.
Mm-hmm. And just to go back full circle, just as we wrap up, you mentioned, like, when I asked you about the first short story, the Cold Boy, you talked about how, like, it was sparked by an image and the divers were opening up the frozen lake and were looking for the boy, or the body, I guess, in this case. Like, when I asked you about the X-Men work, you talked about some of the themes and some of those ideas and stuff like that. I guess every approach is different, right? Like, you don't always just start with an image. You just kind of start with an idea, or like in the X-Men case, those are established characters, so you kind of know where the story is already. Is it just kind of your approach different?
I still have these images. Usually the image is hinged to the main set piece of the story. So, every comic will have at least one major action set piece, usually, that I write. And for instance, there's one that I just handed in, an X-Force story that takes place on a snowy mountain just outside of Tahoe. And there's a chase scene on the snowboard and on skis. And I can't go into any more details than that, but it's an insane piece of sort of gymnastic choreography.
Mm-hmm.
So that image was in my head for some time before I ever even wrote the comic, and the idea was like, how do I get there? How do I get to that point?
And in terms of when you're teaching writing or you're holding writing workshops, and you've done that in a number of different cities, countries, and things like that, is that one of the central tenets that you kind of encourage other writers to do, is kind of start and build around a really central or really pivotal image? Because almost all the stories in Suicide Woods have a really strong image or a set piece, like Mudman.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I don't think there's one way to do it, but for me, that's sort of the germ that everything grows out of. So oftentimes, I'll talk to students about, sort of going through their mind, and oftentimes it helps to consolidate, to sort of catalog memories. And I compare it to a film, and I'll say, like, okay, let's say you watch a trailer. There's usually, let's say 5 central set pieces in a film, and those set pieces are what are always in the trailer. And those set pieces, too, are what linger in your memory when you're, a few hours later gaspingly recalling what happened in the film with your friends over beers. And those moments, they say moments make movies. Those moments are what you remember years later even.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that boulder rolling after Indiana Jones. You remember the shower scene in Psycho. You remember, Julie Andrews spinning on a hilltop and The Sound of Music. And I'd say that if you, like, every film that's in your head, like, you can sort of just drop it on the ground and it'll shatter into 5 to 7 of these indelible images. And oftentimes these images too, like, before the author, the creator, even knows what the story is, they know that thing. So, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, they write Halloween. They had the scares in Halloween written before they even knew what the movie was about.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where I always begin, and that's where I sometimes ask my students to begin. Even though, other people are like more voice driven or more concept driven. But for me, it always comes down to the image.
It goes full circle back to what you were saying about the X-Force and the snowmobile or ski fight in, was it Lake Tahoe or Utah? Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you've been kind of carrying around this image, like almost like a hobo, and like you just had all your possessions in this one shopping cart and just a bunch of images, and you just been kind of wandering around, and these images had no home for a while, I guess, until you found, like, you got hired to do X-Force, and you're like, all right, I could put this in here now finally and unload that from the shopping cart.
Yeah, and if you think of, I can point to every comic I've ever written, every novel I've ever written, a short story, and I can be like, oh, I know where that came from. And the trick is, finding an emotional or story truth for it, because sometimes it means nothing in actual life. Like, for instance, I've got this story called Refresher Fresh that I wrote, and in it there is an image culled from life. There is a garden hose laid tip to tip in a backyard making a ring. And there are boys fighting in this ring. They're wearing gold-colored boxing gloves. And these gold-colored boxing gloves are so worn down that in places their knuckles show through the foam like teeth through a busted lip. And they're wailing on each other. Now, in actual life, this was me. My friends and I, as an extracurricular activity, used to beat the crap out of each other after school.
Fight Club.
Now, there was no good reason for this. This is pre-Fight Club. We invented Fight Club. and anyways, there was no good reason for this. We were just insane. But in the story, right, there's a truth. And the truth is that their kids are doing this because their fathers are overseas fighting. And so they are play acting, they're engaging in this sort of theater of violence, anticipating what they might be up to overseas. And they're also swinging the pain out of their system because they're so distraught over their missing fathers. So, in other words, you take this thing that is glowing for whatever reason, right? You take this thing and then you find its place in a story constellation.
And can we expect, in terms of your constellations, can we expect more novels? We touched upon the latest book, Suicide Woods, and we touched upon some of the X-Men and some of the Marvel comics that are coming out. Can we expect more novels, or what can we expect from you?
Yeah. I've got a sci-fi trilogy coming out called The Comet Cycle. And in a way, it's me creating my own Marvel or DC universe. And the first book comes out in 2021, and it's called The Ninth Metal.
All right. And are you also exploring film and television at all?
I am. I've been busy with the podcasts, and I've also been busy with film and TV stuff. There is a film that I'm hoping I can announce soon, but right now it's still we're trying to herd cats. We're trying to get the actors committed, and that's always difficult. So
yes.
Hopefully I'll have a movie announcement soon that I co-wrote with my buddy.
Oh, that'd be great. I mean, film, obviously, like you said, like you need like set people, DOP, director, you need all these people, you need the actors. Whereas when you sit down to write a novel, you just need like a word processor or a typewriter, and it's just you. Yeah. So it's a lot easier to get you on the same page.
Yeah, I've had a lot of flirtations with Hollywood that have gone nowhere, but it's always exciting when Hollywood comes knocking.
At least they're still flirting, though, right? So you still got that going.
Yeah. Haven't been kicked to the curb yet.
There you go. So where can people find you online to yell at you for giving them nightmares and or wetting their bed?
I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. They can find me there and give me a tickle.
Okay. And the book is Suicide Woods, and it's out right now, and it is perfect for this kind of fall, wintry type season. One of the themes I noticed is like the word cold is used a lot, winter is used a lot, wind, like a lot of those kind of themes to kind of permeate each of the stories. It's a good time. It's a good time. Fall.
Those are my favorite sensory details, alongside shadows and blood.
All right, that's it. We got to end it there. Once the maniacal laugh begins, I think that's usually my cue to get out. We covered shadows, we covered seasons, we covered short stories, Mary Shelley, and then we even got around to the X-Force and and Wolverine. Good old Wolvie. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And the book is fantastic. You did a great job. So high five.
Thanks, man. Thanks for reading it. Thanks for making some noise about it.
Yeah, no problem.
Bye.
How cool was that? That was my second interview with Benjamin Percy. That voice is amazing. He's the type of person that you want when you go camping. And, of course, you want to go camping with him because he's all outdoors, whatever. I'm a city kid. I don't know how to start a fire or do anything, like, useful. But he's got that voice, and he's got those images and that storytelling, and he's the dude that you want with the flashlight under his chin telling you stories. And not like the stories that everyone knows about the guy who escaped from the asylum, and he's got the hook, and then there was a couple there, and they run out of gas, and those kind of cheesy stories, whatever. You want him to tell stories and to take you down those dark alleyways, and it's like, trust me on this. Like, I don't know about this. So, Suicide Woods is great for this. It's 9 short stories and 1 novella. And it is perfect for this time of year, as we were kind of saying, like for the fall, for the winter. This is the kind of vibe where like you can just kind of read 1 short story and then kind of go to bed. And then if you have nightmares or fear P, you're on your own. As he said, you can follow him online. You can follow me online as well. If you also love the smell of fear P in the morning, because it smells like victory. I am at My Pal Sammy. That's My Pal Sammy for Twitter, My Pal Sammy for Facebook, and My Pal Sammy for Instagram. Halloween and fear, yo.